Writing is my favorite thing to do.
Have you heard about the Gateway to Publishing Conference and Convention? They'll have writing workshops, writing classes, and more. June 16th through 18th, 2017 at the Renaissance Airport Hotel in St. Louis, Missouri.
Cool! Where can I sign up?
Go right now to www.stlwritersguild.org and click on GatewayCon.
www.stlwritersguild.org and click on GatewayCon?
That's right. See you there.
Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Write Pack. Welcome back to Write Pack Radio. This is your host and producer, David Allen Lucas, president of Winding Trails Media, president of St. Louis Writers Guild, and author of Crazy Things. And coming up later this month is GatewayCon. Yes, you just heard the ad right before I started speaking, but come to GatewayCon in St. Louis. It is cheaper than most large conferences. We have 20. Okay, I need help here, Brad. How many workshops and?
There's 37 workshops and writer panels.
Thank you. And pitch sessions and more. And if you don't want to come to the conference but you want to sell your book, we also have a book fair going. Check out www.stlwritersguild.org and you will click on the big button that says GatewayCon.
Down to the last minute here.
Yep, we are down to the last minute. And with me today is my favorite Madame Murder.
Fedora Amos. I write Victorian whodunits like Jack the Ripper in St. Louis and Mayhem at Buffalo Bill's Wild West. And I am going to be at GatewayCon, and you can just Google GatewayCon, and it comes up first. Did you notice that?
Yeah,
that's wonderful. Yes. And I'm going to be there. I'm president of Greater St. Louis Sisters in Crime, and we're doing a very special workshop, which is called I Love a Mystery. And we know you will too if you come and listen to us.
Mm-hmm.
Also with me today is...
Yes, Brad R. Cook, author of the Iron Chronicles, which is steampunk YA. Check out my latest short story, Doomed Flight of the Majestic. Probably out now, or if not, out very soon. So do check that out. You can find it all at bradrarcook.com.
Also with us?
My name is Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a children's book author and illustrator. My fantasy novel, Threadcaster, is available now on Amazon in ebook and paperback. I also have a short story currently out on Amazon called Water Curse, which relates directly to the characters in Threadcaster. It's not a sequel, no spoilers. But if you'd like to read that for free, you could go to www.threadcaster.com and find it along the right-hand link panel under the Out of Darkness anthology link. So
I'm in there too.
Yeah, Brad's in there too. You can read his story as well.
Also with us?
I'm Melanie Lucas. I am currently writing a fantasy novel, but given today's topic, I think I'll mention that I spend a lot of my time editing people's consent documents and reading people's scientific papers and protocols.
Boy, that sounds interesting.
Actually, it is.
Good.
And
I'm glad you love it.
And actually, she is published in scientific papers. So
Yes, but those references are getting older.
okay, to us, they still exist. Someplace.
And they're under a different name.
Yeah. Melanie Colaney. And also back with us today is a guest we've had before. I'm going to turn the floor over to him, or in this case, microphone.
Thank you. My name is Rob Howell, and I am the author of a number of stories in the world of Shiurin fantasy world. I have just literally this past week released the third in my mystery, hard-boiled detective fiction, swords and murder kind of story, and that has, as I say, just come out. It's called Where Now the Writer. You can find all of my stories in the world of Shiurin at www.shiurin.org, SHIJUREN, or serendipitously, that is the only entry in Amazon, so if you type that in, SHIJUREN, you will find my stuff. And for today's topic, it turns out that I'm also published as a historian in several papers. I am trained as a medieval historian and use that as part of my inspiration for fantasy novels. But for today's topic, more relevant that I was talking about, 10th century Mercia.
Okay.
Nice.
And today's topic is we're going to celebrate somebody's birthday, which we really don't know when he was born, so we're just making it for June. And that is Plutarch. Did I pronounce that right, everybody?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Plutarch.
Yes, Plutarch.
Is one of those names which I learned first by reading. So of course I've been pronouncing it for almost the entire year this year for everybody. We're going to talk about Plutarch, and we're going to talk about writing nonfiction. I'm going to let one of the historians talk about Plutarch. That could be Brad, that could be Fedora, that could be Rob here briefly. But I'm going to say I ran into Plutarch kind of late in my life. After
Is he doing well?
Well, he's a little crotchety and kind of forgets where he's at. He's in
Dried out
Greece,
a bit.
Rome, America now. Yeah,
Well,
he's an immortal, so he's kind of hanging out with Methuselah a little bit.
Oh, I
And,
thought Doctor Who introduced you.
anyway, yeah. So
Dr. Plutarch, the new series coming.
don't give me
Write
ideas.
it.
Anyway,
Someone write it.
but there was two books that were based on his work, and of course I ran into that backwards as well. I actually saw the miniseries I, Claudius, and which also included Claudius the God on PBS, and then read Robert
Claudius?
Graves. Huh?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I, Claudius? Yeah. And that was
No,
based on-
Plutarch.
Yeah.
Plutarch died like in 200, and Claudius was after that.
Real
Go
quick,
ahead.
let's throw some real science into this.
Go for it.
So Wikipedia science here. Okay. So yes,
that's what-
Plutarch was born in 46 AD, so yeah, after the Common Era, and died in 120 AD, and in Delphi. So he was a biographer, essayist, philosopher, priest, ambassador, and magistrate. So there you go.
Thank you. I was just say, I'll say Robert Graves did use his works. I could have swore it up and down. So yay! And reason why I, Claudius, and Claudius the God was important in that is it's all about the Roman Emperor Claudius as well as all of his crazy family, all the way going up to Nero. But
Well, one should mention he did write of the Flavian dynasty. He wrote
Yes,
of
the
the Greeks.
early ones, yes.
Yeah, he wrote of the Greeks and he wrote of the Romans. That was his kind of claim to fame. But writing about the Flavian dynasty is what we know him for today.
right.
Well, we mostly know him for his influence, not only on Shakespeare, though that is a very huge part of it,
Yep.
but on the entire Western philosophy.
Yes. His base known work is Parallel Lives, a series of biographies of famous Greeks and Romans arranged in pairs to illuminate their common moral virtues and vices. Surviving lines contain 23 pairs, each with one Greek life and one Roman life, as well as 4 unpaired single lives. So, there you go. Parallel Lives.
And he was much more of a moralist, really, than
Yes.
historian.
Right. So tell us more.
Okay. Well, probably the most important thing that we would connect to Plutarch very directly is the various lives of the characters in the play Julius Caesar that, of course, Shakespeare wrote about. But it's important to note, I think, that he had his very own slant on things. And so it is far less historical than what Livy wrote, for example.
Yeah.
But made a much better play. Take, for example, the hero of Julius Caesar, which isn't really Julius Caesar. You don't see how powerful and amazing Julius Caesar was until after he's dead, when everything just erupts, using Brad's favorite word, and quite literally
It's a good word.
destroys things. But the reason why the play lasts so long and why people have a very wrong idea about Marcus Brutus is that he is whitewashed by Plutarch, who then Shakespeare whitewashed it. The real Brutus was not such a noble Roman trying to preserve the Republic. He was just as grasping as anybody else. He was, for example, a governor of a small island, and that's how he made his fortune. By shaking people down. He was a loan shark. He actually starved the people who owned the granaries when they were trying to give poor people, starving people, some grain. He wouldn't let them do it. He would rather charge exorbitant prices and make money himself. So you see, Brutus was not such a nice guy. He divorced his wife with no reason except that he wanted a newer model. He was just not a nice guy. And yet Shakespeare hasn't become this wonderful hero and a noble Roman, doing everything for the right reasons.
So in other words, politicians haven't changed in all these years.
Ever.
And everything's got a
Yes.
spin.
Yes. But Plutarch tried to make a spin on these various characters. His comparison to Caesar was Alexander the Great. And, of course, you know,
Another
he
one
had
of
his
Brad's
own
favorites.
problems too. Well, yeah, you could probably tell us about that. But
Plutarch and I are like this.
I'm glad
That
to hear
explains
that.
a lot of it, Brad.
And now I forgot. I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
There.
Go
That's all right.
ahead, Rob.
Well, you touch on something that I think is at the forefront of everything that needs to happen when we're writing nonfiction. I'm a historian, trained to study sources, and the most important thing that I think that you touched upon there is that every source has a bias. We all have
Absolutely.
biases.
Yeah.
Every witness testimony that you hear in court, it has a bias. Everything that you read of a historical nature or of a non-fictional nature has a bias. And as a historian, the way to deal with that, we know that we can't completely eliminate bias, but we need to strive when we're writing nonfiction. At least I'm thinking of that from a historian's point of view. We have to strive to rub as many sources as we can find so that we can have a more accurate viewpoint on what happened and the people there, as you say there with Brutus and the whitewashing of Brutus in there and the propping up of Caesar and all of these things. It all starts with getting as many possible sources, rubbing them all together, and filing away the biases as best we can.
Until you find the common source. Or common story.
But that's not the goal at all.
No.
In Shakespeare, for example, it was to make a good play.
Yeah, but
And ignoring history
he's talking about his
warping
history.
it to your
The thing is,
vision
most people in
is
history
what
didn't
does
actually
that.
write history.
They were
most people
centuries
were-
later.
Yeah,
Plutarch was too.
no. But even the people who are contemporary, they're not actually writing history. They're not preserving history the way we do today. They don't think of history the way we do today. They were writing down a list of kings. They were writing down a list of things that happened in the empire or that happened to this guy and was preserving and moving forward stuff like that, which is why you can't take history. History is always written by the winners. So every
Exactly.
history has a slant. So as you said, when you write nonfiction, and I've run into this to myself because I write a lot of it, you have to go to multiple sources. If you can get them from both sides, that's the best.
You have to get it from
You
multiple
really
sides.
do. And then you start whittling down to see what are the commonalities, and then that put together is as close as to the truth you're probably ever going to get.
But I would argue that that can't happen anyway because it is in the best interest of the people who do write history to cut out everybody else. That's why women have been cut out. That's why blacks have been cut out. So you cannot get that other side of it. And they don't want it anyway, basically.
Jen and then Rob.
I don't know. That's a pretty. If Rob wants to talk about that, you go for it.
Well, the thing that I'm saying is you are correct that it is absolutely true that we've excluded women and blacks and the victors have written things. And what I'm saying is that is bad history. And that one of the things that has happened over, especially in the 20th century, is that as historians we have done a better job, not necessarily an ideal job, but a better job of looking at alternate sources and finding things. If we exclude a point of view, if we exclude the woman's point of view, then we have failed as a historian, and we are writing our own fiction. It's just historical fiction. The more sources we get, for example, if I'm writing about the Civil War and I'm excluding the point of view of slaves, then I have done a crappy job of writing history. And if I'm excluding the point of view of women through the Civil War, then I've done a crappy job of writing history. And it becomes fiction. You're absolutely correct. that we can never completely eliminate bias, but we have to try. We have to tilt at this windmill, otherwise we are accepting the fact that all we're writing is flawed fiction, and it's not really nonfiction.
Well, narrative nonfiction is a big is a big industry. Like, that's a big genre that lots of people write in. But when you're writing narrative nonfiction, the sort of implication is that you are trying to write within fiction.
It is fiction. It is all fiction
Well-
when you get down to it. Because anytime a writer puts in one thing and leaves something else out, you have fiction. The only thing that isn't, I would classify, is a listing of the absolute facts. Anytime there's an interpretation, there's a twist, there's a spin. And you have some point of view that is being offered. And frankly, many of those points of view are quite good. And we still believe in a lot of them that Plutarch espoused, and largely because he did. Studying Plutarch was an important part of what's called a classical education.
Yeah.
If you went to Harvard or Yale, you didn't, a couple of centuries ago, you did not study science. That was nothing an important person should understand. You studied Greek, and you studied Latin, and you studied the classics like Plutarch and Livy and Caesar's campaign on the Gallic Wars. You studied the classics. And those are still the precepts that our founding fathers used to create this republic that we live in today, or attempt to.
Or attempt to.
Real quick, I'm just going to throw out there this while we're really talking about history on this so far, covering all nonfiction areas, you do run into the bias that comes about in other areas. It's not always quite what we just talked about with history. Let me use an example. I've written stuff, mostly it's about writing fight scenes, but all that's based on martial arts. For those who don't know, I am a Yodan. That means I'm a 4th degree black belt.
Yoda.
Yeah, actually that's why I really don't want to, I'm working on my 5th degree black belt, but I don't want the name to change because it is Yoda. Just add an N to it. I mean, you can't beat it. But anyway, I study a combat art. What I mean by that is we study for the street more than we do for the tournaments. Though when we do go to tournaments, we usually bring home 75 to 85% of the trophies, be it fighting or in kata. And what's interesting is when you talk about martial arts, oh my God, you run into the egos. I try to leave my ego out, and yes, I do have an ego when it comes to it.
Everyone has an ego.
Well, my ego is kind of contrary to the culture of it right now is in American martial arts. And that is, if you go to a tournament and you watch somebody do a kata, or some people call it form, is the same thing, and they're doing a weapons form. And
Kata's is like your floor exercise.
yeah, way I like to. Thank you. No, thank you. Actually, that's
Sadly,
way
yes.
that's exactly where I compare it to. For people who don't know martial arts, it is kata is to martial arts what the floor exercise is to gymnastics, without necessarily all the flips.
Sometimes.
Sometimes the flips are in there, but I've seen people post videos and so forth that drive me completely, totally bat stuff. I almost use the full word. And that is where either the martial artist has taken his hands off of the weapon or has put the weapon to their own personal throat or neck. And it's like, what the hell? Because what a kata is supposed to be meditation in motion. Now I'm coming back to writing nonfiction in just a second, trust me, but bear with me. But what happens is the American public look at that as, oh, this is fantastic. They're going to win big trophies because it's really flashy. It's flashy because it's drill team. It's not martial arts. Kata is supposed to be not only meditation in motion, but it's an imitation of a real fight. Various techniques that are in the style of martial arts that person's studying that goes into it. And that is supposed to be an imitation of a real fight. As soon as you put your hand off of the weapon, you no longer have control of the weapon. I don't care if you are able to roll it around your neck from shoulder to shoulder, all well controlled. If you did that in a real fight, I'd take advantage of it and kill you. But now, where this is coming from is You have, in the world of martial arts, you've got McDojos. McDojos, and I'm sorry if my cousin is listening to this, I'm going to throw you under the bus, Hannah. I love you to death. But your 5-year-old daughter, who I have not gotten a chance to meet my young cousin yet, but still love her anyway. You don't, in your first lesson of martial arts, I don't care if it's style, hand a child a weapon, especially a sharp weapon, at 5 years old, and that is going to be their first lesson, ever. And that's not just my opinion, that's got a lot of other black belts out there that freaked when I went out and talked about it. But you've got different philosophies, and this is where I'm going to go with it. When you write something, like in the martial arts world, you've got, like myself, I'm a Kempo guy, or a Kempoist. You've got your Taekwondoers, you've got your Shotokans, you've got etc. And everybody has a different philosophy and a different spin on what they're doing. Some of these spins, you can see them and you can understand them across the board, and there is a common ground. But other spins are, look at how great I am and my style is, and everybody else is bull stuff. And that's where you run into your biasness that you're talking about, which you run into in the history world, and they try to eliminate the other styles. Where I'm going with this is the bias that we were talking about before, I've kind of gone long-winded on it, is that you run into biasness even in science, when you write science, when you write history, when you write anything nonfiction, you're going to run into it. You're going to have people who claim to be experts who they're not. But the public may see them as such. Don't know who's really dovetailing me.
I'm
Dovetail?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else dovetail?
I think it's all relative.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up. One of the interesting things that you said there was looking into things and thinking they're objective and finding out how subjective they really are. My area of history was 10th century Mercia, and there's only a limited amount of actual historical documents of the Anglo-Saxon world. And so I had to do a lot of working with material culture. And so I went to do an archaeological dig just so I could learn the processes of how they do archaeology, thinking it was much more objective than the prowling through history.
Archaeology minor here.
Yeah. Well, that was the big thing that I talked about with the professor in question, who actually is from St. Louis. His name is Michael Fuller. Michael and Nethery Fuller do archaeological digs. They're fantastic people. Yeah. And we went to Skopje, Macedonia, and we did a dig there. And I learned how much just some of the normal choices that you have to make. Where do you put a particular square? Mm-hmm. How do you keep track of the shards? How do you keep track of the stuff? All of these decisions are subjective, and so your point there is entirely valid. That there's very little in this that's objective. But that doesn't mean that we have to. That doesn't mean we can not try to do them objectively. We just have to understand that there are still flaws, even though it's a different procedure.
Well, I think we have to adapt when we find out that what we thought was right wasn't so right after all. Mm-hmm. And that is a place where a lot of people will not change whatever their bias was.
And there I'm going to quote Ben Kenobi with, it's the truth from a certain point of view.
That's true in nearly every field.
Yep.
It's like if you were raised with your grandpa telling you one thing, well, grandpa obviously knows more than everyone else on the entire planet, and you'll never be swayed otherwise.
Exactly.
It's a lot of people like that.
Can I say something about the scientific process? Because that
go ahead.
wasn't very.
But Brad's next.
Yeah. This has to do with studying more than, and it could happen to do with current events, but basically evaluating evidence. This is all about evaluating evidence. In science, there's a scientific method. And what a lot of non-scientists don't understand is in good science, yeah, we all fall under this fallacy, but in good science never really proves anything. We disprove a lot. So we determine that this can't be true and this is probably true. And if there's enough studies, we say this is almost definitely true, and it's going to take extraordinary evidence to convince me this isn't true. So with 99% well, this is made up, but if 99% certainty, let's do something else. With 99.99% certainty, the Earth revolves around the sun. Mm-hmm. Now, it's possible we're all living in the Matrix, but it is going to take some extraordinary evidence to convince me that the Earth is not rotating around the sun. So when you hear about scientific articles and people say it's just a theory, that's one of the things that really bugs scientists, because a good scientific theory is, well, yeah, but gravity is just a theory too. There are theories and then there are theories. And a good scientist should be willing to change their mind. They don't always. That's true. There's another saying, theories don't die. Theories never really, people don't change their mind, they just die. I forget the exact quote, but basically old theories never really go away, they just die.
Yeah, they die with the people who hold them.
Exactly. So if there's something truly revolutionary, yeah, that could take a good 20 years for people to change their minds, just because it might take 20 years to get that super big evidence to convince enough people that yes, we really are a computer simulation. Because really, it would take a super amount of evidence to convince people of that.
I think that will convince Brad of my swordsmanship. But anyway, sorry, we'll talk about that another time. Brad, you are next.
Yeah, so actually the point Melanie just made is actually why the feeling people have such a problem with science, because feelings people deal in absolutes, and science does not. But that was not what I was going to make. That was not my point. My point is actually going into the different types of nonfiction writing. David, you were talking about writing martial arts and stuff. I too have written sword fighting articles and articles about writing and all this other kind of stuff. And that is very much fact-giving. That is a different form of nonfiction writing, because I'm not really imparting a bias into that so much as I'm imparting information to you. Yeah, I might be portraying certain aspects, but really I'm fact-giving. I am laying out a bunch of facts before you. Now, there's also what is creative nonfiction, or we've thrown out a bunch of different terms for it.
Historical fantasy.
Well, not historical fantasy. That's different. But I'm currently writing, as many of you know, the history of St. Louis Writers Guild, and it's near completion and everything like that. And that is actually a much different. That is very much me giving you stories and things that have been passed down to me, but they're all coming through the filter of me. You are getting these stories that have been told to me by other members and people like that in the history of St. Louis Writers Guild, but I'll admit it, you're very much getting it through me. You're not getting some of the worst parts of it, because those people are still alive, and I don't want to write a book that's going to tick a bunch of people off. And you're getting some of the really great moments and everything that happened like that. And sure, I'm probably going to leave some of the darkest parts out. This is a happy Joy book, but in the end,
exactly, you have a point of view,
and
that
that's just
we all do. We all do.
As I started off saying, I fully admit that this is coming from a point of view. So this is why I say, like, when we deal with people like Plutarch and stuff like that, we have to understand that they're not straight historians. They're just like me. Yeah, I'm writing the history of St. Louis Writers Guild, but it's coming through me. It's it's a conversation with me about the history of St. Louis Writers Guild. Much in the same way that Plutarch was not giving us the true history of the Roman Empire, he was giving us the kind of glorified version of the history of the empire. And this happened. This was a big thing throughout the age. This is why I love the Egyptians, because the Egyptians never had a bad day. If you look at the temples, every day was beautiful and sunny in Egypt. So just know that there are different types of writing out there. There are types where you're really going to focus on the facts. That's more journalism type stuff. Or where we're writing more, an actual, like, laying out of a set ideas for you and a plan kind of thing, as opposed to me trying to tell you a history of something or a story of something. It's true. It's all true. I'm making up none of it, but it is very definitely coming through the filter of me.
Jen? And
I'll come back around to this thing that came to me that I was looking up while you were calling my name. We were talking a lot about, like, what is history and how do we write history, and we've mentioned very briefly journalism. There are other forms of writing nonfiction that are not just historical. There's reporting in on something that's happened that you witnessed that you're trying to write, and in that case, we have control over whether or not we want to put a spin or a bias on to a certain extent.
Why'd you put in that qualifier?
Well, yeah. Well, I'm still human. I'm not going to claim I'm not. But just like I wanted to go through and share some positive tips for people who are writing nonfiction, like Brad, who's writing his history. He's aware of what he's doing and he knows why he's doing it and he's making choices. But if you're trying to be a non-biased observer and reporting, I do some article reporting for the Writers Guild's newsletter, The Scribe, and I always go back to my high school journalism class when they told me, the people who talk to you just say things. Just make them say things. And I thought that was so dumb when I was in high school. And I was writing fantasy stories and fan fiction, and everyone said things with great gusto, and they expounded and professed and all sorts of other things. But the people that say things just say them in nonfiction, in an interview. You can use stuff like asked, obviously, but the word said is pretty emotionally neutral.
Yeah.
And that's a
As
way
opposed to ranted or
it's like you're
gushed,
gonna put if you're
Yeah.
talking to someone and you put down their quote and it says they it's like they whined. Well, now I've put if I wrote they whined this thing, I have painted them in the light of someone who is piteous and maybe like diminished and put out, and they whined about it, and maybe that wasn't their intent, but the people reading my article, that's all they know about this person. They didn't talk to them. So that's a tip I was going to share when you're trying to represent someone else's personality, when you're writing an article or a piece or a passage. Remember just to have them say things, and don't put in any details for flavor, because flavor skews the experience. Now, when you're writing something like Shakespeare, he was trying to entertain an audience. When you're writing something like the Writers Guild history, that's to entertain an audience. They're putting a spin on because the goal wasn't to be as far away from the finished product as possible and just be a filter through which other people can experience the same thing you experienced. This is a presentation of, Shakespeare wanted to take the stories of the kings of England and the Caesars of Rome and be like, I'm going to tell you this great story, it's fantastic, and everyone says, ooh, ah, and perhaps they leave with a lot of misconceptions about who Brutus is. He didn't care about that. He wanted to tell a good story, and he did, and that has then supplanted the true history of those people that were real living people in the minds of generations worth of readers, which in some way is a crime, because it doesn't sound like Brutus deserved to be praised that much.
Fiction will always trump truth. It's amazing the way that works.
Yeah. So all three of you have just in a sequence made a number of good points that I want to follow up on. You, for example, were talking about Brad talking about. Sorry,
all right.
You can't see my pointing on the podcast, but I'm pointing at Brad right now. Brad talked about how he was writing this history and how he's upfront about the biases behind it and the choices he's made. That's excellent. That allows the reader to understand things, and it's being honest about what he's doing, and that's a really good technique. Fedora talked about how people oftentimes let their ego get in the way, and the ego is such a thing that creates fiction in its own way. The more you let your ego get in the way, the more we have skewed things. And I loved what Jennifer was talking about the use of language. As a fiction writer, normally now, I'm absolutely using whined or cried or shrugged or whatever.
Lots of shrug.
Yeah, back to shrug. I'm absolutely using those things because I am trying to set the tone. But that's not what a nonfiction writer should be doing. It's a really good point there. And I think that was just a nice sequence of you guys.
So to sort of follow up on that, I finally looked up. I wanted to look up when Triumph of the Will was released. Oh. Triumph of the Will, which is considered a documentary, a war documentary about Hitler's Third Reich, released in 1935 by the Nazi Party. Mm-hmm. And I watched a really great episode of Folding Ideas on YouTube. Look him up. He's really smart. He's a film major. He puts videos out. but he made a point of bringing up Triumph of the Will because Triumph of the Will was created as propaganda.
Yep.
But at this point, so many people consider it to be a factual portrayal of Nazi Germany. And that's Triumph of the Will is the film where you see them all the soldiers in the big line with the big swastika posters, and it's where they get all that footage of Hitler giving his speeches. You can't see me doing my Hitler impression with my fist.
It's too bad because it's rather cute. Go ahead.
Hitler would be so glad that I made him cute, I'm sure.
No. He never go on.
But the point that Folding Ideas made, that I wish I could give you his source but unfortunately I'm not him. I'm just calling this out of the back of my head. And he didn't write an article, he made a video, so I can't sit here and listen to it and tell you what he said. But he made the point that at the time the Nazi Party was in shambles. Like, they would be easily destroyed by the Allies coming in with a surprise attack and taking out a couple key leaders, and there would be nothing. Because it was infighting, they had just gotten rid of the previous, regime, and they were coming up, and they wanted to make a big impression so that they could then continue with the plans that then ended up being World War II. So they created pretty much this elaborate lie of this well-oiled machine of what the machine of war that the Nazi Party is to intimidate everyone else to think, oh, we can't attack them. And that was 100% so that people wouldn't attack them because they would have failed. They would have fallen to whatever attackers. And nowadays, when you think Nazis and you think, what did the Nazi Party look like? We weren't alive then to see, and we weren't we didn't live in Germany at the time to know. And even then, those people were all probably also deluded because the propaganda machine was moving really well on purpose. But we think of the big swastika flags. We think of the thousands of troops marching in unison. We think of the parade, which is so long, apparently, in the actual film, which I haven't watched all of the film. I have no intention, really. It does not interest me at all to see Nazi propaganda now that I know it's all a lie. But those are the images that are pulled out and put in actual documentaries as proof of what it looked like when it was propaganda.
Yeah.
So an example of history being written not even by the victors, but just by the
wannabes.
The people
By the wannabes.
who wanted to be, who worked so hard to make it an authentic lie. Like one of my favorite words is verisimilitude.
Yes.
Verisimilitude is not life, but close enough to like it that you believe it.
I believe Colbert called it truthiness.
Truthiness, yes.
And the fascinating thing about what you just said is how much they believed it, how much their ego that Fedora brought up skewed their impressions of that. They did that, as you say, as propaganda to sort of intimidate all around, and it worked, but it also got them believing their own press.
Yes.
And in 1939, when they invade Poland, there's a great deal of surprise by the German leadership that what the British and the French are actually we're actually going. Wait, they're not supposed to do that.
Didn't they see our movie?
Yes, and now it wasn't entirely,
No.
but there's a lot of surprise on their part because they do think that at this point that everybody is believing it because they know they are believing it themselves.
Yes.
Yep. And one thing I would point out, what you just did, Jen, was fantastic. It is a propaganda style of information that was provided.
Mm-hmm.
If we go back in time, since we're going to really focus on history, but guess what? This applies to everything. Any type of nonfiction that you are writing that deals with events over time, be it martial arts, like I talked about earlier. Wow, it's martial arts. Martial arts, you run into the shadow zone over, I'm going to call that around 1300 AD. What you run into with history are different shadow zones. That's my term. In history, you've got two dark ages. You have what we call the dark ages, and then you have one that occurred for a shorter amount of time.
Sorry, Rob and I just pointed at David.
Okay, but there's where I'm going at. That's not where we're talking about dark ages. You had another point in time around Crete, and it does happen in different cultures, different times. Where I'm going with this, though, is how information was recorded. We're used to waking up and now going online more or less and reading the reports that are supposed to be true journalism. And some of those reports are true journalism, and other ones are not so much. And we're thinking journalism is journalism is journalism. It's not. There's a lot of genres of journalism. There's advocacy journalism. There's gonzo journalism, etc. Gonzo is where you're trying to punch up the story, almost like it's a fiction.
Clickbait.
Yep.
Yes, is clickbait. Then you go back. Let me just go back several thousand years. Whether, and I don't care faith-wise what you believe in. I'm going to use the Bible for a second. You go to the Old Testament and you look at how they recorded information. And it's a complete, they didn't care about some of the details that we today care about. So information fell through the cracks. And when information falls through the cracks, it creates what I call dark zones. Because you're looking for information that doesn't exist anymore. And you've got to take that into account as you're doing your research. And that's when we'll go, okay, you two, now have the two attack dogs.
You want to
attack me
do
for
rock,
dark
paper,
zones.
scissors to
No,
see who
go
can
ahead
get 'em
first.
I just want to point out the whole concept of the Dark Ages
Yes.
was created by Petrarch.
Yes.
Not Plutarch, but Petrarch.
Yep.
Close.
In what was actually the start of the Renaissance, which happened 100 years before the Black Plague is when he's writing. And so, yeah, I get what you're saying, that there are lacunae in all sorts of recordings, because, yes, people in biblical times recorded, had different interests, and you know, we have different interests now, and they had different interests in the 1600s, and they did it so in Japan, and if you want to follow the martial arts in the West, have this whole thread from Aristotle, and you have all this fantastic stuff that's going on in the East, and all of these things. Yes, there are lacunae, but I just, as a guy who's as a historian focused on technically the Dark Ages, I hate that term. Its entire advertisement spin by Petrarch, who's like, well, there were the Romans, who were really good because they're Italians, and I'm an Italian too, and things are great now because now we're getting into what I'm going to call is the Renaissance, since we've had all of this dark time. Petrarch is not one of my favorites.
And just as a quick response, I understand. I was just using a term that most everybody knows, but also too, as I did say, there was 2 times. There was also the fall of Crete, which led to what was called also a Dark Ages.
That's
for
true.
about 200 years.
But that's not my big red button.
I am offended by your red button.
Okay, moving.
To be honest,
Fight after the show.
To be honest, Dave, there are more than 2.
There really
We've
are.
got
Yeah.
the sea people who come in and wipe out all the Mediterranean. We have no idea where they came from.
Right.
Göbekli Tepe. How do we have the archaeology at Göbekli Tepe? It's not supposed to exist that way, and yet the science says that it's
12,000 years old.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But here's the thing, and you were right, it's all about medium and how these people chose to write it down. Some people choose to write things on reeds. And amazingly, yes, some of the Chinese reed sticks have still exist. The stone that people carved in tend to do really well. But writing started off actually as an inventory system.
Yeah.
So writing started off as, I've got 10 barrels of barley and I'm going to give you 5. And we need to write that down. So we know that. That's how writing started. It wasn't for hundreds of years later that somebody finally wrote down about the first king. And that's what, that was kind of somebody recording the kings that had come before them and all that kind of fun stuff. So, words and the idea of, passing stuff into the future has always been there in the form of, storytellers. And this is why I love to call writers storytellers, because that's what we've been doing for umpteen ages. But yeah, so the way in which everything is kind of conveyed and put forward and all of this kind of stuff, which is why you have to study your sources and you have to know things about the time period you're in. Because, the Dark Ages might look like a Dark Age, but if you were living there, you would think you're in the high of society, just like we do right now. It is a skewing thing like that. And I'm actually a big fan of these little dark moments in history because they're fun to go back and kind of look and see, And I love ancient history, so for me, most of it's dark, and I have to spend a lot of time reading a ton of different sources and then trying to piece together any little thing that's going to point me in a direction that says this might have happened in that region. It's a thing. But I just want to throw that out there. But the multiple ways we lose history.
We do. And I'm just going to say, give me the first 3 books by Will and Ariel Durant. Well, really, at that point, Will Durant on anything with the West, and then I can leapfrog from there. It's not always complete, as we know. Moving on.
We owe Plutarch many of our modern precepts. And I'm going to give you just a couple of examples. First, you need to understand a little bit about how he wrote. What he did was take one of the Hellenics, Greeks, ancient Greeks, and then a little more modern Roman that he thought were a lot alike, and he would compare them. He would write a biography of Alexander then Caesar. He would write one of Alcibiades and Coriolanus, which is what I'm going to talk about a little bit. And then at the end of that, he would compare them, telling which ones he thought were better and why. When he compared Alcibiades and Coriolanus, for example, he talked about Alcibiades being a really great orator. And why was he such a great orator? Because he had the knack for telling people what they wanted to hear. Coriolanus was much more plain-spoken, and therefore Alcibiades was the better orator. Does that sound familiar at all? Mm-hmm. What about militarism? Alcibiades was good on land and the sea, while Coriolanus only good on the land. So who was better? Or better rounded militarism is better than just one-pronged militarism. As for being nice to people, Alcibiades was a snake in the grass kind of guy. He would be nice to people as long as it suited him, and then he would cut them off at the legs and go on somewhere else, which of course would net him some enemies, and he would go into exile and fight against the people he originally was loyal to, and then change back again. While Coriolanus did the same thing, but once he became a traitor, he stuck to being a traitor. So Alcibiades also won on that count as being the kind of the prince, Machiavellian sort of hero as far as government is concerned. Does any of this sound familiar to anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So another perfect example of that is our viewpoint of Galileo. Galileo was one of several scientists at the time saying exactly the same thing, and the other ones were members of the church, were bishops and cardinals, and they were not sanctioned. Galileo, however, told his buddy the Pope to
Where to go?
shove off, and I'll not use the term that's probably more appropriate. And shockingly enough, the Pope said, take that back, and he said no, and then Galileo got Galileo'd, so to speak. But you're exactly right. It's the way you describe somebody, and Plutarch is so important in history for just that sort of that dichotomy that you talked about of rubbing two figures together. We pretty much every historian has gone through a historiography class that has done something of that owes to Plutarch. I mean, the thing you're so right there.
Just think how different things might be had he or somebody in equal importance to him prophesied how good things were without militarism, but about being kind to one another. But nobody seems to want to take that approach.
Marcus Aurelius
It's not a power approach.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you.
Marcus Aurelius did a lot of that, but you're right that Marcus Aurelius, in part because the successors that he had were so vapid, never really.
Oh, let's call it cruel.
Well, cruel, but also they were
And not real.
They
they
bright.
were weak,
Are
generally
you saying
speaking.
they're dumb? Were they dumb?
No. I think actually the cruelest. I think intelligence does not imply. Or cruelty does not imply a lack of intelligence. I think to be really cruel and to be really bad at something, you have to be really smart to a certain extent. Yeah, I think. I mean, there's a genius in stupidity. If that.
That's the quote of the episode.
Go ahead. That was.
Well, I was going to throw this back to another one. We were talking about Plutarch and how he, has given us a skewed slant of history, and I just wanted to bring up another famous historian, Josephus,
Yes.
who wrote most of the stuff that we know about the Bible, but now we've come to find out that it is so skewed that much of it is almost wrong. I mean, his story of Masada can't be trusted at all, because the reality is it may be completely inaccurate, because he was literally telling another tale, and of his life and just adding it into this tale because it punched it up and it made it sound a little better.
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story, kind of thing.
Exactly. And this is the way that most history is written. Until our modern age, where we have 6,000 books on World War II, But the reality is,
and still, there's no definitive one. Each one,
each one has a slant.
And I guarantee you, they probably all have a little bit of a skew and a slant.
They did
what
You
all
just
that
need to go
stuff.
2,000 years and see which one survives, because I'm sure all 6,000 won't be around.
That's true.
I think that's
It'll all be
something
in the
important to know when
library
you're writing
somewhere.
this kind of stuff.
It'll
Is
burn
that
down.
as much as we don't want to be Plutarch and Josephus, I don't know if we can avoid it.
There's a
We
sample.
can limit it, but I don't know if we can avoid it.
You're right, and it gets back to your point earlier about the biases that will exist. But there's a sample size issue here that comes into play. If our only piece of evidence about somebody is like if I only look at Charlemagne through the life of Charlemagne by Einhard. Einhard was one of his palace retainers. He was owed his entire livelihood to Charlemagne. Shockingly enough, Einhard's life of Charlemagne is very flattering of Einhard. If that's the only one we take, then we've got then that is going to so skew everything. But if we've got other sources there, and you talked about there being 6,000 or more World War II ones, in the aggregate, they're going to come fairly close to approximating the truth the more of them you get, because it's like the scientific method that you were talking about earlier, Melanie, in that it's the more samples you get, the lesser the margin of error can be. And so when we're talking about Plutarch and we're talking about ancient sources, we have those dark ages, those dark spots. And so we do have that limitation of 3 or 4 or 1 or even 20 sources, whereas maybe now we can get closer because we do have thousands of studies.
And yet that goes against the grain of what the human brain does, which is to narrow and focus from the various places that we draw information from. And that's exactly what happened in history. So that there were other historians, there were other biographies, but we don't read them. They're long gone, because Plutarch seemed to embody the message, I think, the morality that people wanted to survive.
Well, you're absolutely right, but then there's also luck. I mean, what did we
like
lose?
the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example.
What did we lose in Alexandria?
Oh God! Don't even make me cry.
Yeah, I mean, how many historians' work or even just back to the reference of the notations of 5 casks of barley to 2 casks of barley kind of thing. Those can help create a really good picture of, and can add to the sources.
We have a great understanding of ancient trade because of those little seals.
Absolutely. And then when you combine it with other sources like agricultural archaeology, and you compare the historical record to the agricultural archaeology, now all of a sudden you have a much better picture of population size, which now gets you an idea of the trade routes and the levels and the kinds of things they could do, and it all builds together. Alexandria.
I know. I still want to cry over that one. And I'm going to say what you just said is a perfect example. The reason why we have Plutarch, the reason why we can know at least what ancient Rome was like and so forth from his point of view, is there were so many copies of his books. And because there were so many copies of his books, there was a larger chance of those books surviving to be passed down and copied and so forth down to us today. And also, along with that, let me point out that unless you are fluent in whatever original language that any of your source material was written in, guess what? There's a bias, there's a unconscious bias, I'm going to call it. Maybe not be actually accurate, but unconscious bias of the translator translating it from one language to another one. From ancient Hebrew, going for Josephus, to Greek, to Latin, to modern day American, or modern day English. There's British English, there's American English.
Yeah, there are famous stories throughout.
Yeah.
My favorite of them is always that in the Garden of Eden we eat apples.
Yeah.
Eve just handed an apple.
They didn't.
Yeah.
It's only because of paintings.
Well, paintings, but really it's a European view that comes in much, much later, and the fact that apples and, what they mean and all that kind of stuff. In reality,
It just says fruit.
it just is fruit, and most likely is a pomegranate or a fig.
And
Or
if you
something
want
completely different.
if you want another example of that challenge, go translate poetry from one language to another, and that gets all
Yes.
sorts of fun.
Very much so. In translation, I'm going to step on somebody's toes out in the world because I know the way in which a lot of people look at certain books that still exist, but translation errors can happen, and so can mistakes. And sometimes those translation errors carry over to the next copy of it. But one that didn't was the original King James Bible. The original King James Bible in the Ten Commandments said, "Thou shalt kill." Not "thou shalt not." Big mistake, got corrected, but this is an example that does happen. And
Well,
sometimes,
King James had a little bit different view.
yeah, well, yes, he did. But we won't go down that road. Anyway,
And we're not implying that was on purpose.
no,
He
I'm
wasn't
not.
trying to change what it said in the
I'm not.
previous
But-
translation.
What I'm saying is an error in translation from language to language can, if it's not caught, can also skew what ends up being what you read. Go ahead.
One of my favorites, you brought it up, is, what happens to these languages. I talked about, my studies of ancient history, and one of my favorites is the Hittites. We all know the Egyptians, we all know the Assyrians, we all know the Babylonians, but not many people know the Hittites. Yet the Hittites were actually a greater culture at their height than any of the others. In fact, it's to the Hittites, and the reason we know about them is because the Egyptians are constantly going, "Hey, can you send us stuff? Can you send us grain? Can you send us this? We need this." Or the Babylonians will contact them, the Assyrians will contact them and say, "Hey, we need your help." And this is how we know of the Hittites. We've found their city now. It's up in Turkey. Yay, we found it and everything like that. But there's no Rosetta Stone. So no one has been able to translate the Hittite. We have all these, clay tablets and all this stuff, but no one can read them.
Right.
So because of that, no one knows about their culture. And we know the Egyptians like crazy. Everyone knows the Egyptian. Egypt first is the basis of our history right now, which probably isn't even true. But it doesn't matter because that's what we have the nice translations for and all that kind of fun stuff. And the poor Hittites are just left up there in Turkey going, "We were bigger, but no one knows about us."
And I'm going to say this real fast, and you said the word, you said the name of it. If it wouldn't have been for a complete accident on the part of some Napoleonic soldiers, we would not have had the Rosetta Stone, which is what we were able to use to finally translate the hieroglyphs of Egypt and learn more about that culture. So that, once again, history, complete accident. And
So write your book in 3 languages.
yes, there you go. Good luck with that, by the way. Go on.
Well, I think, another fascinating, fun example is the Zagreb mummy. The Zagreb mummy, for those who don't know, was a guy went to Egypt in the 1800s, and the habit at the time was to buy yourself a mummy, bring the mummy home, and have an unwrapping party with your buddies, get drunk and eat, and then unwrap the mummy. And it turned out that the largest extant sample of Etruscan that exists today is the linen of that mummy from this guy in Zagreb. And we still don't understand Etruscan, but the amount that we have, so much of it is on this mummy's linen.
Sidebar, completely off, but I'm glad since you talked about that, really brief. If you ever want to read kind of a fictionalized version of that type of unwrapping party, Edgar Allan Poe, where the one with the mummy that comes to life, I forget the name of it, but just look up Edgar Allan Poe and you'll be able to find it.
We were so mean to mummies in the past.
We really were. Well,
Unwrapping
they
parties,
made
we
really
ground
good
them into
firewood.
paint.
yeah.
They made great firewood. They were
Ugh.
really good for medicines. They kept your yang up.
They're human remains.
Yeah,
But I have to say that if I go out and 2,000 years from now somebody unwraps me, I think that'd be kind of hilarious. I hope I can be a ghost at that party.
I want to read the story. I don't want to write it. Where it turns out that afterlife thing was true, and all these people lived for 2,000 years. You don't tell the unwrapping party.
Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe. And with that, unless anyone else has anything else, final thoughts?
Remember the past? If not, we're doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
George Santa Anna.
Yes, and let me quote along the same lines. This is someone more recent. Herman Woke. The beginning of the end of war lies in its remembrance. And on that note, have a great week writing. Tune in next week for yet another interesting topic in the writing industry. Thank you for listening.
Did you know that Right Pack Radio has an international audience? How would you like to reach that audience in regards to your books, your book services, your author services, or more? Go to www.windingtrailsmedia.com and look under advertising for more information. If you don't have a script, that's not a problem. We will be happy to work with you. Once again, go to www.windingtrailsmedia.com for more information.
The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her.